I wrote a really bad book when I was like 13. I never published it, but it was called this. The writing's really great. It says "The Train of Charlie Erner and Other Heterogeneous Writings" by M.H. Chalov, which was my pen name at the time, and it was very strange, and I think I've decided I want to read one of the stories from it, so I'm gonna do that. This is the Hall of Tamir. The Hall of Tamir was an ancient place, laced with death. One creature lying in its depths, however, was alive. Mordred was about 6 feet tall and had dark skin with short hair. His light green eyes were small on his face. He struggled, confused, and made it to his feet from apparent slumber. The hall was deep, seemingly endless. Mordred looked around, not remembering why he had woken up in such a strange place. He in fact did not remember anything. Looking behind him, Mordred saw a door, very poorly painted red. He wanted to leave this place in which he had awoken, but the exit was far too foreboding. A hand stretched from it in the place of a knob. He turned away with fear and began to shamble in the opposite direction, thus starting our story. Where he had awoken was a calmer spot. The ground there was sandy. The walls here were wide and gigantic piles of rubble, with water running from the tops. As he walked, Mordred noticed the ground begin to change. It was now coarse dirt. The walls were different too. There were now wide wooden barrels on either side. These had paintings all over them. Pictures of random people, places, and words. He walked farther, and the paintings began to fade away, only to be replaced by a scene of violence. Knives stuck into the wood, which was rotten. Bullet holes covered the structure. A corpse lay on the ground. It was not rotten, and it was not bleeding, as it had been killed recently by some unknown force. Upon seeing this, Mordred screamed, and his walk began to speed up. Next he came to an even stranger spot in the hall. This spot was narrower. Here, if he extended his arms, they would touch both walls, which were brick. There was a complex marble textile floor that he did not understand. This was also the only place in the passage that had a visible ceiling. This was stained glass. The picture portrayed was an Arthurian scene. I don't know how that's supposed to make sense. As Mordred did not know much about history or legend, he assumed it to be Arthur himself, though he was wrong, for the king's robe was black and torn. I don't know what that means. I don't think I knew anything about King Arthur either, so. He looked at the portrait for a minute or two, tantalized, then looking back to the floor. That's when it hit him. The mosaic he was standing on perfectly matched that on the ceiling, but there was something off. The one on the floor, though matching the one on the ceiling very well, was more familiar. It was Mordred's face. The hair and skin were both very different, but the eyes were the exact same, and so were the structures and the proportions. He looked back and forth between the two, awestruck. He then wandered away. Ahead of him, he heard a shout. It was incomprehensible, and sounded more like the sound of an animal than that of a human, but it was noise. He ran in the general direction from which it came. He had not noticed her before, but there was a woman standing but 20 feet away. She was younger, probably in her 20s. Long black fell over her jacketed shoulders. He tried to speak to her, but she just looked at him questioningly. That is when he noticed that he didn't entirely remember how to speak. He could think thoughts easily, but they were all images. He could make sounds as well, but he had no words whatsoever to speak them into. The woman tried to speak, but seemed also to have a lack of linguistic ability. He tried signing to her by pointing to himself and saying his name. She cocked an eyebrow, confused, pointing towards the stained glass and shrugging. He did not know what she meant. He raised his hand in a symbol of confusion and pointed at her, trying to ask for her name. Ishild, she responded softly, signaling that she could understand him. She again gestured at Mordred and to the mosaic. That's when he understood that she must have noticed the similarities between him and the floor. They soon came upon a spot where there was no more ceiling. The walls were now plaster, and the floor was tiled. Nothing here seemed particularly strange, however. Ishild stopped in her tracks. She pointed up at the ceiling. Mordred looked up. Up above him was a ginormous human skeleton, sticking from the wall and reaching for the ground. At least 30 feet long, the creature was far beyond the limit of what could possibly be natural. The bones were yellow, and it was clear that it had sat there for a long time. The shield started to run away. Mordred simply stared up at the thing. He jumped back. He could have sworn it had moved. As he looked at it closer and closer, a finger twitched. He bolted after his shield. They ran through segment after segment of the corridor so fast I cannot describe each one. After what could have been hours of running, they met the end of the passage. The spot was ancient. The wall, ceiling, and floor were marble. Pillars were on either side with carvings and inscriptions on them. There in front of them was a door, not specifically wide and wooden. There was no knob, but a nail protruded from the middle. Mordred tugged on this and the door cracked open. He walked through the portal and out of the Hall of Tamir. It's a very strange story for, I think I was probably 13 to have written. I was a fucking nerd. I didn't have any friends at all because I was homeschooled, and I think that explains why I wrote a book. But, there's a lot of symbolism in there that I don't think actually means anything. I think I just thought it would be interesting and sound interesting. I believe I was into Lovecraft at the time, and I think I was trying to kind of impersonate him sometimes. Other than the fact that it's very poorly written, a lot of the ideas, and this and all the stories in here kind of remind me of some, weird shit that someone who was, really obsessed with, mysticism would have written in, the early days of Gothic fiction. It's kind of like Orientalist or whatever. And in this case, it's quite bad because it was written by a 13-year-old. There's also other things in here. I remember there was something that was me trying to rip off C.S. Lewis. There were a few things like that. I was very Christian. There were some other longer stories that were much more completely incomprehensible than this one. Yeah, the book ends with a page that says God lives on. I think I was trying to... I don't really know what that story was meant to be. I think I was trying to express purgatory or something, because again, it's all religious. There were a few more Pulp Fiction-y, not the movie, but more mystery stories in there. But most of it was stuff like that, just completely schizophrenic, structureless, ramblings. I don't even know what was happening in that story. It wasn't exactly a story. You could tell I was thinking about a lot of things, and I wanted to express those in some artistic medium, and I just decided on writing, even though I didn't actually care that much about stories. And I also think I was very, very mentally ill. And I still am quite mentally ill. But I think that I didn't know that at the time as much. And I was a bit deranged. Because there's a lot of weird mystical shit. I know I would focus for like hours on the characters' names, and on again these references to random mythology and like weird ancient like linguistic stuff. Like again, like I don't think I knew anything actually about Arthurian mythology, but there's like 2 references to it in there. To this day, the only thing I know about it is the movie Excalibur, and I definitely hadn't seen that at the time. But it's certainly not very good. But yeah, if you want me to read more of this stuff, I could always read. There's quite a few other stories in there, and I have a few other ones that I didn't do it that weren't and put into a book. If you want me to read that, please comment, like, and subscribe. Peace.